Before I forget, I'd like you to know that, and we're missing a couple people who this will be important for, so maybe I'll wait. Here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to start out talking about Hemingway. Hemingway, the cultural phenomenon. For those of us over 50, we remember Hemingway as the ultimate American hero, icon. He wouldn't have known the word icon, but there you go. Hey, Stacy. So talk a little bit about him, and then then get into the book, which is which a lot of you have read, which I think is wonderful. So Hemingway, I'm gonna start the Hemingway part with a confession. When I was a young man, when I was a boy and a young man, he was my hero, absolute hero, and I think I wasn't the only one. If you remember, some of you will remember this, but in the days before TV, the only visual news we got was from magazines. And Hemingway was on the cover of Life magazine. It seemed like every week, but it couldn't have been. But he was on it very often. And there were always articles about him in Look magazine and Life magazine and Time magazine before we had TV. And then by the time TV came around, he was gone. He had killed himself. But in the 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s, he was an icon, you know, like the word says. And I was particularly taken by, as a young man, by his writing style, by his voice, but also by a thing called the Hemingway Code, which some of you have heard of, which when it's distilled, the Hemingway Code is to perform with grace under pressure, basically. That's what it is. And I don't think there are too many interpretations of that. That could be loosey-goosey, because there it is. His favorite thing, something I never learned anything about really, was bullfighting. And for him, the moment that the matador tempted the bull and the bull passed, called the pass of death, the bull came as close as possible to him. The horns came close to his groin at, 2,000 pounds of pissed off pot roast coming at you, you know? I mean, there it is with horns. The matador's job was to remain totally unflappable, totally unmoved by this thing. And Hemingway loved that. I think that the Hemingway Code, which Fred Hoffman, some of you may remember when he was head of the upper school, accused me of adhering to, which didn't bother me at all. But I think the Hemingway Code informed my young life, and I think it came in handy as an infantry officer in combat. Don't show fear, because if you do, your boys will get scared. And nowadays, it's your boys and girls will get scared. He's been out of favor for a while, Hemingway has, as a man, as a person. He's called a misogynist, as you probably know, and which I don't understand, because he married 5 women. But the way women are treated in his books are not acceptable anymore. And if you did your reading for today, you saw plenty of that. And when I got to Hawken, I remember being excited about teaching Hemingway, which I continued to do. But I also remember being warned that this is not appropriate stuff for the late 20th century. And now we're in the 21st century, which is the sensitive century. And I'm rereading this, thinking about you guys, I thought, God, I'm glad they're not teenagers, you know, because they want a special room and to be read to it, that kind of thing. So my take on Hemingway is a very personal one. I read everything he wrote. I heartily recommend A.E. Hotchner's Papa, which is a biography that I read it in Spain, so it must have come out in the early to mid 70s, which I thought was fantastic. And we were traveling through Europe at the time, and I was reading it at the time. And if you order wine via Hemingway, you're doing okay. Yeah, it was pretty fine. What else about Hemingway? What do you guys remember? Anything, Bob?
Fear was never established completely why he committed suicide. I mean, was it depression? Was it drinking? Or was it
Someone said, and I don't remember where this is from, Bob. But I think it's reliable. Someone said that he had reached the point at which he knew he wasn't any good anymore as a writer, and I think that's true. I mean, his last 4 or 5 books were, to me, really quite disappointing. And I think he had hit his peak when he was young. I think he hit it with The Sun Also Rises and For Whom the Bell Tolls. And I saw that movie the other night. Have you seen the movie? Fonda and Ingrid Bergman? Oh, God. Yeah, they make love, not on the camera, of course, because it's in the 40s. But he says the ground moved. And I thought, God, when I was a kid and I heard that, I fell down. You know? What am I missing?
the whole Cuban experience?
The Cuban, yeah, yeah, and Spanish Civil War, which he covered as a journalist. And Mary Lane's dad was one of the first people in liberated Paris to ride in a Jeep, and he lamented that he was second behind the driver to get into Paris. But he had something to say on the recordings about Hemingway in Paris.
I think one of the Hawken students interviewing him, David, got some very silly story down on tape. That Daddy was in a 2-seater. Everybody know what a 2-seater is. And this guy turned over and he said, Hemingway here. And introduced himself. So Daddy said, Brian here. And he always thought that was the ex comedian. They came across each other in France too.
Interesting.
Not just in the 2-seater.
And he said that Hemingway rented an entire floor of a hotel and partied his way through. Yeah. Yeah, and it's understandable. Sorry, it's understandable why the contemporary youth is put off by him. Sort of understandable, not really totally to me, but because he was a rough man, he was macho. He
hunted lions, didn't he?
He hunted everything. Yeah. He hunted humans.
So now they would think.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, the times are different. This is a very whole different. It was a different culture then. You know, I mean, it really was. So let's go to the book. What do you think? The thing he says that's my favorite book. It's certainly one of them. One thing that helps to understand is that this book, in our time, came out 5 years after Sherwood Anderson's Winesburg, Ohio, which is the same form. And everybody says Hemingway was so bold in this book to choose this form. Anderson did it 5 years before, and he picked up on it. There's a nice story about Sherwood Anderson. Faulkner had finished his first novel called Sanctuary, and he heard that Sherwood Anderson was in New Orleans, so he hunted him down. He said, Mr. Anderson, he said, I've got a novel. Would you help me get it published? And Anderson said, yeah, sure, as long as I don't have to read it. But anyway, Anderson did Winesburg, and if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. And then Hemingway came out with this form, which was at first, in 1924, it was a different form, but now the final form is 25. And we get the full spectrum here, I think, don't you? We start out with a journalistic account of a terrible slaughter at Smyrna, where the city's burning and the Greeks are trying to leave and their babies are dying and everybody's dying. And then it lapses into, and anytime you have a question or comment, please speak up. That's what these things are about. And when you hear a wine bottle opening, you know that we're in the right place. But what I want to do, what we plan to do is this. The first part of the book is the Nick Adams stories, which ended up in a bigger collection called Up in Michigan, which I highly recommend. It's all about growing up as a boy. It's all about growing up in Michigan before the war, when everything was innocent and happy and sweet and swell. And the first story in Indian Camp is did your quote from Indian Camp already come up?
No.
There you go. Remember this? Yeah, the last sentence especially. His dad, Hemingway's dad, biographically, killed himself. And so did Hemingway, as you probably know, as I'm sure you know. So this is kind of interesting from a distance, but I remember when I first read this, I was surprised. What we got with Hemingway is a couple of things. First of all, no adverbs. Yay! Yay! Stephen King said it's the greatest thing ever when he read Hemingway and there are no adverbs, which is really not true because he uses truly quite a bit. But anyway, that's another story. His prose is called machine gun prose. It's called West Point prose. It is relies almost entirely on one thing, and that's this iceberg effect, which I'm sure a lot of you know about. The iceberg effect is best seen, Hemingway's use of it is best seen in the story called White Hills of Help. Hills of White Elephants. That's Lan, he's a school teacher. A good one too. 20 years? Unbelievable. But anyway, here's what it is, and I'm sure you know what it is, and so I won't belabor it, but he'll say something without describing the feelings and emotions behind it. And the idea, and I'm going to do some of it with Soldiers Home, but the idea is that the tip of the iceberg is what you see. The biggest part of the iceberg is beneath the surface. And so what Hemingway's doing, and I should probably wait till we get to a specific example, but what he's doing basically, like Cat in the Rain, he's not telling you what they're thinking or feeling, but he's giving you the opportunity to think or feel as you would feel and think in a situation like that, which invites your participation in a really wonderful way. And I tried it in all 5 of my books and never was able to do it. It's really hard to do. I'm not kidding you, it really is. Pardon? Oh, you're sweet. So here's what we're doing. I have 4 volunteers. Only 3 of them are present. One of them obviously chickened out, but that's okay. I think, as a matter of fact, I'm sure she won't have chickened out. I'm sure she'll be here. But they're all alumni. They're all veterans of this group. And I asked each of them to take a short story from the collection and comment on it. And I think my bottom line was a 10th grade book report kind of thing. 3 of them are here. And Warren, class of
75.
Is going to do 3-Day Blow. And the last of the Nick Adams, is it the last of the Nick Adams stories? End of something with Marjorie, and then this one. What's next? No, The Bachelor, where he goes to that camp where the boxer is, and the black man knocks him out. So that's the second to last Nick Adams story. Ladies and gentlemen, Warren Morris.
Well, I'm still scratching my head, sort of figuring out how I was anointed this. But my takeaway from 3-Day Blow is that this is a story about booze and women, and maybe that's why Peter thought I would be good to take subjects of mine.
No, but go ahead.
Nick Adams spending the weekend in a cabin in the woods with his buddy Bill. And, at first there's a lot of guy catching up, shooting the bull, talking baseball. But what sort of left the biggest impressions on me were that, virtually this entire short story is about the two of them drinking. And and as the pages go on, the drinking seems to get more significant and more significant. And the other topic that comes up in my way of thinking is women. And so apparently this is the story where Nick has announced that he's broken up with Marge. And, Bill is, strikes me as this character who's one of those little people that sits on your shoulder and says one thing, and somebody over here that's telling you the other thing to do. And Bill's take on women and relationships is, they're a monkey on your back, and they'll just drag you down. And, there are a couple of passages that I will share with you.
Pages?
Pages, yes. This is on page 46, and this is Bill speaking. Once a man's married, he's absolutely bitched, Bill went on. He hasn't got anything more. Nothing. Not a damn thing. He's done for. You've seen the guys that get married. And then a couple lines later, it was probably bad busting it off, Bill said, but you always fall for somebody else, and then it's all right. Fall for them, but don't let them ruin you. So, I think we have two subjects which to me are probably age-old topics. The first being drink, which we often associate with celebration, and there's a beautiful part of that, and then there also is the destructive element of it. I understand that on some level the Nick Adams series is autobiographical, and there's reference in here to Nick's father, who was a doctor, and apparently Hemingway's father was a doctor. And Nick says that his father never drank. And certainly there's some references here to Nick and Bill saying, let's get drunk. And, that isn't, that's not the teetotaling version. So to me, there is, here's something that, something can be said about it that's good. There's something that can be said about it that's bad. It also seems pertinent that, this is probably a period of time where, in my limited knowledge of history, prohibition is, or abstinence is becoming public discourse, and so maybe that's a reason that makes it relevant. And, to the extent that there's this yin and yang conversation about booze, I think the same is said for women. Nick seems to be conflicted about women. He doesn't seem to share the same image that, it's just a waste of time. And on some level, there was a wonderful side, or a side of Marge that was beneficial. And to me, it's a dynamic of, you can't live with them, you can't live without them. Love hurts, love is all you need. Sort of the age-old story. So That's
No, fantastic. Thank you. The thing that got me about this story, and my students didn't catch on to, is Bill's dad is out in a storm. Now, birds don't fly in windstorms, especially windstorms with heavy rain, which is what this is. So he's out at night, drunk, with a shotgun, hunting for birds. Doesn't make any sense at all. It's totally nonsensical. The boys decide to be like him. And so they get really drunk and they load up their shotguns and go out. And I think what Hemingway's giving us here is a saying that, you know, if you guys want to be like men, you probably should think things out a little bit before you do this, you know, kind of thing. Because the shit's going to hit the fan in a few years, and it did in 1917. Any other comments on that, Claude?
First of all, I have to confess I listened to this, which was not, in other words, to the whole book. So if I say something, because I didn't catch it, but to Warren's point about, this one was, as in several of them, nothing gets resolved. I mean, that's sort of classic Hemingway in my head.
Except in yours.
Well, I mean, or at least in some, so nothing is resolved. And I felt also in that one, to Warren's point, that Nick really was, there was remorse over the Marge thing. And, you know, and Bill didn't want him to feel that, and yet Nick really did. And so I felt that there wasn't tension, but just, there was no resolution. You know, they were, so anyway, that was.
Well, he couldn't.
Okay, so what did I get?
He couldn't marry Marge because she was lower class. He's summer people and she cleans houses, and so did her mom. But the thing that got me was, and every time I read it, is in the end of something, which is when he tells Marge it's not fun anymore.
Right.
When she takes off, she leaves in the rowboat, and Bill comes walking out of the bushes. No, and Warren got it right. You know, he's right on his shoulder, you know, the whole time, and saying, you can't marry someone of a lower class. Again, that's stuff that's buried, that's not on the surface. Anything else on that, on 3 Day Blow? Yeah, Tim.
I had two feelings at the time with Bill coming out of the bushes and whatnot, and
Really creepy.
you
think so?
negative all the time about the relationship with Marge. I felt that it wasn't so much Nick's relationship with Marge, but Bill really didn't want to lose his friend Nick
Interesting.
to
Yeah.
this relationship, because he said,
Yeah.
the next thing you're going to be moving to Charlotte or
Yeah.
whatever the
Good
city
point.
you mentioned in it. And then at the end, and I didn't realize that Hemingway's father was suicide, but when they were drunk and they had their shotguns and they were going out in the storm and they heard a shot go off down in the marsh, something just hit me and said, I wonder if the father just committed suicide.
Ooh, wow! I didn't think that. It could be. Well, we're never gonna know. Yeah, unresolved. Yeah.
Help me understand the significance of 3 Day Blow, other than.
I think it's just a storm. I'm not sure there's anything else to it
There's
than
a
that.
passage towards the end that says, outside now, the Marge business was no longer so tragic. It was not even very important. The wind blew everything like that away.
So what does that mean? I don't know. My favorite part of that story is when they're talking about it being a swell log that they put on the fire. A swell log. Oh, it's a really swell log. That's right, Bill agreed. They were conducting a conversation on a high plane.